Back again with Jamie Holroyd from Stratosfear, who's been giving us a bit of an economic update as it goes, as it unfolds with this coronavirus position, mainly from an economic point of view. Jamie, how are you going?
I'm doing okay, Tom. I was listening to our last couple of podcasts where I said I was great, but and I'm doing okay. But in the environment, yeah, it's been a hectic couple of weeks. So I think when you and I first spoke, we just kind of sat down and we were just talking about what was happening, and now we've had a little bit of time to sit and reflect and see where things are actually going. So a lot of the things that we talked about on day one are really starting to happen and unfold as we sort of predicted they would. So I'm quite curious to see where it all goes.
What's your take on where things are now that you've had a bit of time to sort of digest what's happening? We've had 3 lots of stimulus or saviour package, whatever you want to call it, from the federal government. We've had another announcement today by the state government about commercial tenancies. What's your feel for how it's going?
Tom, I still think that we've got announcement after announcement, and that unnerves people, right? I think it's unnerving myself and some of the people I talk to, that when, as we mentioned last time, the more initiatives you roll out, the more people are thinking, well, something must be happening, right? And I liken it a little bit to, we're in a plane, the plane looks like it's going to crash. It's crashed, we're alive, we look around, we're okay, but it's in the weeks ahead, now what happens, right? So now how do we support ourselves? Where do we take shelter? Where do we get food? They're the kind of issues that we need to look through. So I think too, the business people I'm talking to, I get that sense of kind of shock as to what do I do next? So I'm really, really enjoying, from an intellectual point of view, all the different people we've been talking to, some really bizarre outcomes that you would never expect in a million years. And it's not until you reach out to a lot of different people across different industries, different demographics, different geographies, that you start to get a bit more of a holistic picture.
Well, I suppose at the moment you've got a situation where I heard a comment today from Christian Porter, the Industrial Relations Minister, saying that someone said 3 weeks ago that his BFF was the secretary of the ACTU in 3 weeks' time. He would have probably had you committed somewhere. But here they are on the same page, trying to actually sort out the country and working to a common good.
I think, Tom, if you look at history, it probably hasn't been realistically since World War II, where the world has had such a unifying crisis, where everyone's kind of involved, or as many people. In fact, I think in this case, you've probably got more people involved, and it's a lot more dramatic and a lot more sudden. But if I just run you through, Tom, some of the really interesting but bizarre things that we're seeing at the moment. Now, it's starting to come out in the media, but I've certainly heard these reports that home burglaries are almost at zero because everyone's home. So it's very hard to rob a house when someone's home. That's a perverse outcome. We do a lot of work with people in that automotive repair industry. Now, historically, those businesses have been fantastic businesses because their level of activity is unrelated to the economy. So if the economy goes down and you crash your car, you need to get a new windscreen, get your car painted, it normally has nothing to do with the economy. But someone pointed out to me, well, no one's driving, no one's crashing, right? So even those industries are right down. Now, I then spoke to someone in the insurance industry thinking, well, you must be doing well because there's no claims. So they're busy getting rid of people because now they have no work for them to do. So a whole bunch of unintended consequences. I spoke with my son earlier today, who tells me he's pretty plugged into these things. Nintendo Switches sold out. They're selling out within an hour. They've been put on the shelves. So that was another interesting thing that obviously people are sitting at home pretty bored. Been watching we called it a couple of weeks ago, we talked about martial law. We've moved to the full police state now. It's apparently it's illegal to breastfeed your baby in public, eat a kebab while you're running, have a driving lesson, and a few other things. So even, I saw some reports today that even driving your car without a valid reason is enough to get you in trouble now. Now, this is a sort of disturbing level of overreach. And I had someone who mentioned to me, if you look at what typically happens in a communist country, that doesn't take long till people start dobbing on each other and carry favour with the authorities, and you're kind of getting that already as well. So I think that where we're at is really run the risk of serious community pushback if it keeps going in this direction.
I mean, some of the incidents you're speaking of regarding the driving, I think they're New South Wales specific. They seem to be really coming down very, very hard in terms of police activity. I heard the WA police actually respond to that, and of course there was the very funny press conference the other day with Mark McGowan laughing about the guy running and getting the kebab and sort of losing it a little bit, and saying that wouldn't happen in WA. So hopefully we're not there. I did hear a press conference this morning saying that they didn't want to close the beaches this weekend, for instance, but if people just don't take any notice and disregard it, then they're left with very, very little option. So, so in WA, we're still a little bit sensible, but the driving incident and such, I mean, those sorts of things in New South Wales, very concerning, as you said. I mean, I heard a story the other day from someone who's working in one of the COVID clinics, saying that the casual nurses at hospitals are actually finding it hard to get shifts at the moment because outside the preparation for the COVID onslaught that we're still expecting, there's no elective surgery, there's no anything else happening. So aside from emergency stuff, so in actual fact, most casual staff that aren't involved in the front line at the moment are actually being stood down in hospitals, if you can believe that.
Well, Tom, if nobody's out and about hurting themselves and getting exposed to other things, then yeah, look, what we try to do is at Stratosfear, we try and be at the pointy end of things, right? We've got a great network, we speak to a lot of customers, we're involved with a lot of, as I said, policymakers, politicians, all sorts of people. And what we look for is let's go and ask 10 people a question and what answer comes up, right? So it's anecdotal, but there's enough evidence to suggest this is a real issue. Now, I've been trying to tap into what is the position in hospitals, and the one that you've painted sounds really accurate, right? They're almost empty because there is no elective surgery, and as I said, people aren't out there playing sport, breaking legs and doing all those other sort of things. So as some people will know, my daughter's had a serious illness for a long period of time, and she's in hospital at the moment, and she's going absolutely around the twist at the moment with all the rules, and she only allowed one visitor for 1 hour between 6 and 7 o'clock at night. So you've got controls on what the food's being served. Everything's in turmoil, right? So even in a hospital where you think it would be organised and have lots of resources, it's still got their own challenges there as well.
The sense of things in terms of you constantly are speaking, obviously, with financiers and banks and such. Are they settling down to this new paradigm about giving money away?
Tom, I like to think that we're at the pointy end of this, right? So what we're doing is we're reaching out, we're grabbing a thread and we're pulling it and go, oh my gosh, look where that's going. So just today, I had a conversation with someone around, commercial landlords. So what does it mean for your lease? I know the state government's been announcing some initiatives which we're coming up to speed with. It's been announced today. The government's passed its package in Parliament, but we're going to give relief to tenants. Well, the lease has got personal guarantees signed into it. The lease has probably got provision for bank guarantees. What does that mean? Does everyone start pulling all their bank guarantees? Right? The bank then has to fund them, right? It's a irrevocable call on capital. So these are some of the things that no one's talked about yet, and I'm not sure everyone's even thought about.
Some of those things were raised today. I had a bit of a look at what the state government's announced about the commercial tenancies, and certainly things like calls on guarantees, calls even on bonds, things like that. Certainly commercial landlords are not able to do that under any circumstances at this point in time. So there's some pretty tight restrictions on the landlords. There's been an agreement with the banks that they would support the landlords who are supporting the tenants and so on and so on. So, I mean, there's an awful lot of people involved in this loop.
Well, look, Tom, it makes the assumption that the tenant can't pay, therefore, if we defer arrangements with the bank, it'll all be okay. Now, what you will find is a lot of successful business people will build a business, they'll sell it, and typically the way they'll structure their arrangements is they might retain the buildings that the business was in. So they will effectively be the landlord to their former business. That's quite common. And they might rely on that rent for their income. They mightn't have any debt, right? So you're going to have these people, typically they're going to be older as well, where they're not going to have any revenue.
Well, I suppose that's, yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things you asked me before we went on air about my take on it, I'm finding there's two very significant groups, I suppose, in social media land that you're finding. There's the woe is me. There's a lot of people that are working that are really, really, really frustrated that they're not getting looked after. They're sort of taking the approach that everyone, dole bludgers as they call them, are getting looked after. People that aren't doing anything are getting looked after. Dole bludgers have had their money doubled and they get these bonuses. We're out there working and keeping things, the industry ticking along, and we get totally ignored. Whereas you've got the other end of the scale where people are going, well, actually, yeah, I've still got a job. I'm really thankful for that. I can sort of look after myself at the moment. Let's look after those that can't because they've lost their job through no fault of their own, et cetera, et cetera. There seems to be a real dichotomy in terms of the sort of people and their reaction to it in social media. And there doesn't seem to be too much grey area.
Look, Tom, I'm a ardent capitalist, right? So I believe in free market economics. I believe in Western democracy. And what you're finding now is the complexity of a centrally planned system. You pull on this thread and it has a whole bunch of unintended consequences and things that people never think of. Now, I've had two schools of thought, and people approach me and ask me for my opinion, is if I'm a pensioner, why is my pension, why am I receiving more money than I was before, right? Now, one school of thought will say, well, you're really unaffected, right? So your normal arrangements will continue, and in some parts of your life, things will become cheaper. So the price of petrol's gone down, et cetera, et cetera. The other school of thought says, and this becomes the political side of it, right? So this is where I have real issues with what's happening because no one can see if you stand back and look at the picture. So why would we double or give extra cash to pensioners? Because we can't be giving money to people who earn a lot more and you get nothing, right? So this is a purely political outcome. You can say that you want people to spend it, and that's why you're giving it to them. Now, I've made this really sarcastic sort of opinion, but it's actually true. If you wanted people to spend money, you'd give it to teenage kids, right? They'd be the ones to go out and spend it, right? That's true. Yeah. So what you've got is, now my question would be, what is the cost to that political outcome? It is purely political, regardless of the merits. And I'm sure we all like pensioners to be looked after and as a society, but we're borrowing this money with money we haven't got to do this. What's the cost of it? Now, I've made this point over and over again that this is a response to the government's response to the virus. It's not the impact of the virus itself. So one of the really interesting things at the moment is Sweden have taken a very brave decision and gone in a different direction. So a lot of the medical professionals that I speak to, who they clearly don't want to say this publicly, but they're bigger on the herd immunity aspect of this. So one of the problems that I have is in Australia, we've been talking about flattening the curve, but we might have quashed the curve. We have the curve so low, the deaths in Australia still, I think, as at the count this morning, was about 40 people. So as we mentioned before, one's too many. But if you get it down that low, you run the risk that there is no immunity being built in the community. You're going to be locked up for a very, very long period of time. And then when everyone comes back out again, you run the risk that everybody gets infected, right? So what we're not looking at, why are we doing what we're doing? And I think that answer is not clear. Now, from my perspective, what we're trying to really do, let's call it, is we're trying to manage our hospital resources with the demand on the hospitals. Now, if that was the case, the thing that we would be focused on is, well, what is the capacity in the hospitals? Why don't we have on the news every night? This is the capacity, this is the utilisation. Is it 100%? Is it 10%? Is it 50%? We don't know, right? Now, we're having a massive, massive impact on the economy without knowing what it is we're actually trying to do. Now, having that conversation with people is quite complex because people think what you're trying to do is undermine the social distancing and the spread of the virus. It's not that at all. It's about what is the optimum objective here for a society, not just now, but going forward as well. Now, if in Sweden they have a much better outcome, there's going to be a massive repercussion on the rest of the countries that went in a different direction. Alternatively, if they have a terrible outcome, then it's going to look good for them. So I think the other problem that we have in Australia is it's our system of government. Now, I know it seems all quite cooperative, but really we've got a series of premiers and the federal government competing to be the hardest. Now, if we turn on the news and, deaths are really, really low in one state but really high in another state, politically that's a disaster. Is that what we're trying to achieve, and is that the optimum outcome? The answer to that's probably not, right? So we're going to end up with perverse political outcomes rather than what is the best health outcome and what is the best economic outcome, and how do we get the balance right between the two?
Onto something you and I both very much like, the AFL. I mean, they just are hell-bent on trying to get a competition up somehow. One would suggest that it revolves around broadcast rights and nothing more. What's your take on what they're trying to do about this idea about lockdowns and playing on an island and whatever else they're trying to do?
Look, it can only really have one outcome, and that's about getting some sort of game up so you can get it on TV and sell the rights. Now, even if you could sell the rights at the moment, I'm not sure what those arrangements would be. Would they be some percentage of the rights that existed? I don't know whether the TV rights had some sort of force majeure clause, but I'm sure no one probably anticipated something like this affecting the AFL and NRL and their other major sporting codes. So I think the chance of it getting up is remote, to be honest with you. I can understand why they're trying to do it, but again, it kind of highlights the financial desperation that people are in. We have to do something because some of these clubs may not survive. You've seen that tension already play out in between some of the AFL clubs already. So.
Very much so. In terms of business, the sort of businesses you're dealing with and their interactions with the banks, with the various negotiations and such you're involved in, what's your sense? Is it starting to stabilise as far as I'm getting a handle on this, or is it still just as fraught with concern and anxiety as it was a couple of weeks ago?
Look, I think it's starting to move, but it's still a slow process, right? So we still don't know yet what the impact is. I think the reality of where we're at hasn't really sunk in. I think that financiers are constrained for resources. That's clear. We predict that would be the case. Things are slow to move, but I think it's slowly starting to wind itself into action. Look, in some regards, the banks have been quite good with mortgage payment rules. That seems to have worked pretty well. It would appear that Centrelink is starting to get into action. Quite interestingly, Tom, I spoke with a business that have operations in New Zealand, and over there it's been quite different, that the cash has flowed very quickly. And some of their announcements that and I'm not across all the detail, but they didn't have thresholds or benchmarks. So they're the sort of things that slow things down. So we're trying to, said they had a couple $100,000 deposited in their account straight away from the New Zealand government. So it's an interesting contrast. Now, we talked a little bit about this before, that the challenges with, and I'll call it what it is at the moment, essentially planned economy is you end up with people falling through the gap. So my attention turns at the moment is I look on social media and I see lots of really heartwarming, interesting stories about people educating their kids at home and their homeschooling. But there'll be a portion of the population where some kids are getting no education at the moment. I spoke with another person today who had a relative in sort of clinical health area. You've got dysfunctional families who are now locked up in a house together. So that's causing some issues on domestic violence, mental health. It's a lot more complex than it appears. And again, I think it highlights the importance to have the conversation. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? And what is the actual optimal outcome for us?
With us moving forward, the government, I'm sensing in the last probably 48 hours that the government is starting to back away a little bit from doing more. Like you talk about the people falling through the cracks. Pretty much everyone that's not getting everything is saying, well, how about me? How about me? And there's all these exceptions to the rule saying, well, how do I get looked after? And you understand that, human nature. But the government is, I heard some pretty, I suppose, stern words this morning from the Treasurer saying that, well, we've done these three things. This is where the course is. We'll monitor and but they've pretty much ruled out doing anything really substantial further to what they've already done. Do you reckon they're starting to realise that they've probably taken it to the limit?
Look, it's interesting, Tom, as I think about my own mindset as this goes on. I watched the Prime Minister's announcement today. And I did feel a sense of crisis about it. I did feel that, it was like a bit of a car crash, a plane crash, whatever analogy you want to use. And there was a bit of a thud that it's a lot of money. Right? This is a lot of money. This is a fundamental change to who we are, what we do, and what the future looks like. Now, the picture I paint is that it's easy to push back against what I'm saying, right? To say, oh, well, look, it's about human life, right? And it is. Now, I ask you this, Tom, what does education and healthcare look like in 5 years' time with $1 trillion in debt?
Yeah,
Right? What does it look like in 10 years' time? What does it look like with an ageing population, right? Now, again, is that what you need leaders running ahead of what are the issues coming up, right? There's exactly the same in business. Now, what's the key question if you're in business in the moment? Am I in strife or not? And if I'm in strife, how deep is the strife that I'm actually in? And if I'm in deep strife, what am I actually going to do about it, and what's my next course of action?
The
Now, I think that
leadership issue is a really interesting one, because we're seeing some people, both in government and business leaders, someone like a Twiggy Forrest has obviously taken a big step up to try and make his mark here. But leadership is something that it's all over the place at the moment, isn't it? Some people are stepping up. I think Mark McGowan's done a great job in WA, and certainly hasn't done himself any harm in terms of how he's handled things, in terms of showing strong leadership for the state.
Tom, I think you and I should take personal responsibility for that and take all the credit, because we mentioned the other week that I thought he was too heavy-handed with some of his rhetoric, and since then he's granted a special permission to the Easter Bunny, and he's had a bit of a comedy festival about the man eating a kebab, right? So he's clearly softened his approach somewhat, which is good to see. And I was a bit of a critic initially, but I think he's done a pretty good job.
Yeah. Equally, Scott Morrison, he was criticised pretty heavily during the Hawaiian holiday and the bushfires. He certainly stepped up a fair bit. I think his approval rating is certainly up quite considerably, but he's shown that he's clearly a bit fragile about a few things, but he's stepped up a fair bit, hasn't he?
Look, I think one of the things that's a bit of a challenge is that you've got to think through what are the flow-on consequences of this, right? So Scott Morrison's legacy is completely on the line, right? Now, I don't think, people have talked about you park your ideology at the door, right? Well, I don't think it should be up for negotiation. So you've got to remember, and I'm on this bandwagon, is that this is the same government that was going on about a debt and deficit crisis, right? And this was a few years ago out of the response to the GFC, and they've now gone and made that look like a molehill. So the other concern that I have, and this is me thinking through steps 3, 4, 5 to come, what happens if the Prime Minister's approval rating goes up? It means he's got a license to spend money, right? Which means we're going to spend more than we would have spent otherwise, right? So might look and feel good from the government's perspective, but Tom, I liken it to a little bit when you go on holidays, right? The money just somehow doesn't seem like it's as valuable when you're in France and you've got to buy that replica of the Eiffel Tower, and you get home and you go, why the hell did I buy that, right? I didn't really need that. So just taking a photo instead, and that's exactly where we're at. There will be a point in the next 5 years where we wonder what we've done. And now, I'm not saying the job's easy, but I think that when you rush to do things and you don't think through the consequence, you're going to make mistakes. And I was thinking today not about the Prime Minister, I was thinking about the opposition leader. So I was really pleased that he came out and said, we're going to hit $1 trillion of debt, and he called it. That's what we need. We need to hold the government to account, that someone says, understand, this is what you're doing and this is where we're going. I was quite, really, really pleased to see that, and I was really pleased to see that it got some media. Now, from my vantage point, and maybe I'm too busy, in the trenches, but I haven't seen a lot of Anthony Albanese lately, so I thought that was a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, no, I think he's struggling to get some cut through, but I thought his statement as well, that he doesn't want to be known as an opposition leader, wants to be known as the Labor leader. So he's supportive of the concept, but still going to question it where it needs to be questioned. So, I mean, having that bipartisan approach, I think, is a good one. And it shows a bit of unity, and the fact that the states are getting on with the feds, and the ACTU is getting on with the minister and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we are, and I don't think it's too fine a point to say we are in a form of wartime at the moment.
Yeah, well, it certainly feels that way. That's for sure. Now, I don't have an issue with, you know, an adversarial form of politics. I don't have an issue with people not agreeing, because I always think if you've got two competing ideas, you probably end up with the best outcome. It's more the tone. I think the tone's okay at the moment. So.
Well, it's a fast-moving exercise, and no doubt we'll speak again in a couple of days, and yet more will have happened by then. But gee, it's hard to keep up with it all at the moment, isn't it? It's dizzying pace.
Look, I'll just share some of my own personal work story with you. That we have a client who's made an offer on a business. We're in the middle of due diligence. We've spent the last couple of weeks and months trawling through, you know, sales data. We're looking at sales percentages. We've pulled the numbers apart, put them back to front, and I've said to both the buyer and the vendor that this all might be a waste of time because everything changed in the last couple of weeks and we have no optics on the future. So what we've tried to do is do a catalogue of their target businesses, industry exposure, and then how can we rate that for risk, and then what sort of sense of outlook is that going to give us? Now we're trying to make the best we can with imperfect information, so we'll see how that pans out. Now this is where it gets really, really interesting. This is either a fantastic opportunity, buy at the bottom of the market, you know, build a larger consolidated business, or you buy something that suddenly tanked and you've paid too much. So it's a fascinating exercise, and probably explains why I look like I've probably aged about 5 years in the last 2 weeks, Tom.
Now, if a business wants to get some advice and get some assistance, because I think everyone needs some at this point in time, how do they best contact you?
Look, before I go into the contact details, Tom, I want to make this point really, really clear, is everything that we understand has changed. So the idea that we can go along and get money because we think we need it, we might not be able to. The outlook's changed, margins have changed, supply chains have changed. Nearly every facet of the business has changed. Your employees' circumstances have changed. How they do business has changed. So if you're not sitting down, updating or doing a proper, detailed, thorough strategic plan, you're actually being negligent. Now, we can certainly do that for people, and we will reach capacity, so we can refer you on to other people who do similar things, but it has to be done because you cannot run a business where you change every facet and keep going with an old business model. It has to be restructured, it has to be looked at. Now, if in the event that you look at your business model and it doesn't need to change at all, well, then you're probably sitting pretty. But people can contact me. Probably the best way at the moment is just to call me on my mobile, because I have so many emails, I'm struggling to get through them all. If people want to call me on 0422 907 902, and if they do want to call me, just give me a 2 or 3 minute background on your industry, how big it is, your circumstance, your concerns, and then what we can do, Tom, is we can relatively quickly work out, is your business model still viable? As I explained to someone a couple of weeks ago, you either tinker with the model you got and try and improve it, you either take an axe to it and completely restructure it, or maybe you just shut it down. And typically the 3 strategic choices, and it's about knowing which one of those to make and how soon to call it. Now, what typically tends to happen is people plow on and they keep going thinking that it's all going to be okay. And then what they happen is they run out of what we call run out of runway, run out of cash, run out of options, and end up typically in insolvency.
Yeah, it's a tough time. Good advice. And so there's your number. Give Jamie a call and certainly touch base if you need some assistance. Jamie, always interesting, and no doubt we'll have much more to speak about in the next couple of days.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Be safe. And if anybody needs help, please give me a call. Thank you.
Jamie Holroyd, the Managing Director at Stratosfear. You can contact him, Stratosfear with an F-E-A-R on the end, and we will no doubt speak again in the next few days.